Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 1099 processing uh, webinar for MIP. We're going to give just a few minutes to let everybody get into the Zoom session. So we'll get started in just a minute. We have quite a few registered for this webinar. And Kristen, you can see my screen, right?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, it seems to have slowed down, so let's get started. So welcome again to the how to process 1099s in MIP. If you've done this before, not much has changed, but we'll get into that. Before we get started, I want to give a shout out to our Innovate. If you have not registered for the Innovate 2025, which is going to be held on May 5th through 7th in Nashville, especially MIP users, we really want you to register because we're doing a big focus on MIP, not only the classic version, but also the cloud version and what the differences are, right? And so we're doing a whole revamped MIP track. So we really want the MIP users to register for Innovate, which will be in Nashville this year, and we've never had it in Nashville to my recollection. So with that, I'm going to get started. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Dougie Stanton. I'm the manager of education services, a very long time MIP user. And so let's just dive right in. If I can get there we go. We're going to start off with some of the setup and frequently asked questions. And there are some changes this year. And we'll go through, what are some of the changes? What are the requirements, the forms? How do you verify the data? How do you go through the Atrix wizard and how do you file? I'm going to assume that none of you have done this before, which probably is not the case. I'm sure that some of you on here have already done this in the past, and there's not many changes as far as the overall process, but there are some changes. So before we get started, what are some of the requirements um, that you need to take care of? You'll have to forgive me. It's really cold out today. We're actually getting snow, and so my cheeks are making it hard to talk. So first big change, and this is a change that the IRS has required. If you have more than 10 forms, if you combine, you may have payroll, you may have other things. So combined forms, this is 1099 or W-2s or 1095, etc. You have to e-file the federal copy only. And so in the past, you could actually print out the federal copy and mail it in. You can no longer do that for the 2024 1099 forms or W-2 forms or a combination of them. The other change is the federal copy no longer requires, those red pre-printed forms, the federal copy no longer has to be that. They can be printed on plain paper. And as always, MIP will require you to be on version 24.1 or later to process the 1099 forms or W-2s if you're using payroll. And so you have to be on that version 24.1. If you're not, you can't use the wizard. And you're going to see that on my copy of MIP in a little bit. Our IT has not been able to update MIP for me in time for this webinar. So I won't be able to run the wizard, but no worries. I have lots of screenshots. And so you will be able to see what it does. Side note, before we go dive in, as you have questions, please mark them on the Q&A question at the top of your Zoom toolbar so that I can answer them as we go along. Okay? And Kristen is also going to have 4 polling questions. If you need CPE credit, be sure to answer at least 3 of the polling questions in order to get CPE credits. Okay, that was our brief commercial break. Let's dive in. So, as I already mentioned, MIP needs to be upgraded to version 24.1. And once that has been updated, and side note, and if you are an admin and you have administrative rights for the machine that MIP is on, which normally is on a server, right? It needs to be upgraded, but there's a separate thing. Once MIP has been updated on your workstation, if you go to and you're going to see that in a minute. You're going to go to activities and accounts payable and process 1099s. There is this forms update button on the right-hand side. That will also need to be updated for any of the workstations that will be used to process 1099s. Assume this also applies to W-2s, but there's not a lot of you that do the payroll in MIP. But you have to update the forms on the workstation in order to process the 1099s. And updating these forms on the workstations will give you the most up-to-date 1099 forms from MIP. Okay, let's go on. So before you process all the 1099s, you need to be able to verify that the data is correct. Well, that's pretty easy to do in MIP. You have to run the cash journal report. And by the way, side note, processing 1099s is still done in Classic. The report can be run in either Cloud or Classic. Um, I'm going to use Classic to illustrate the report. So this report, the cash journal report, will allow you to verify the data in MIP. Let me show you how that's done. We're going to actually go to MIP to show you. I'm going to go to in MIP, I'm going to go to reports, to journals, to cash journal reports. And I actually created a 1099 vendor payments report in my other database. I didn't do it here because I wanted to show you how you can do it from scratch. If I do a summary, I'll just use one of the reports that have brackets around it. You may already have a report that was created previously that doesn't have the brackets around it. The ones that do have the brackets around it, you can use as templates because they were MIP created. So I'm going to use the 1099 summarized vendor totals report. I'm going to change the date from this year to prior year or last year. Notice when I change it, it removes the report name. So I'm going to 1099 summary vendor balances. Okay. Then under the content tab, on the right-hand side, on the selected columns, I want to see the vendor name, the vendor code, the ID number, the 1099 box, how much was paid, and if there were any adjustments. However, this adjustment field that MIP gives you is the wrong adjustment field. You want to remove that adjustment field and you want to scroll down to the available column on the left-hand side and select the 1099 adjustment field. Okay, so right now I'm just going to click save and then I'll select it again and it's at the top now. And let's check the filters before we run it. So right now, if the vendor record, if the source is V, so it's a vendor record and the vendor issued time net, and the vendor is marked as 1099able, it's going to pull. Remember, this is a demo database, so there's not a lot of data. I hope you can see this report. This gives me you can tell it's a demo database because what database has those few payments in the whole fiscal year of 2024 or calendar year of 2024? So what this will allow you to do is at a glance, see which ones are NEC, which ones are miscellaneous, which is not applicable. So for example, ABC Office Supply. ABC Office Supply should have all their payments as 1099able. So I need to adjust this payment. And so, for example, I'm going to make note that it's 88766 is what I need to adjust, because when it was entered, the 1099 flag was not applied, or the vendor may not have been marked as 1099. So if I exit out of here, I'm going to go to my vendor records. So I'm going to go to accounts payable. I'm going to go to vendors, and you can do this in Classic or Cloud. I'm going to click on ABC because that's the vendor where I need to make the correction. And on the vendor record, I'm going to click on the 1099 information tab. On the 1099 information tab in the adjustment grid down below, I need to specify that the adjustment applies to the calendar year of 2024, and that it is the NEC form that I need to make the correction to, not the miscellaneous. And now it's the NEC 01 is the box, and the dollar amount is $887.66. Okay, so that's how you make an adjustment. If too much was taken out, you would do a minus, a negative dollar amount. Okay, and so then I'll click save. Now, if I go back to the report, if I go back to reports, journals, cash journal, and I select my report again, and I'm going to run it again. Do you see how the adjustment amount now shows up under the adjusted total? And it'll still show the NA. And I'm like, okay, what if I want a report where it no longer shows the NA? On this report, I wanted to show everything for any vendor that is marked as a 1099 vendor. But for the final, you may not want to see that. You don't have to you don't have to worry about it being on the report. The 1099 process, when we go through the wizard, is only going to include the totals that have a 1099 form and box. So it will not include this one up here. But if I wanted to, I could say, yeah, I could filter out the, oops, I have too many. I have this screen open twice. Let me close this. You know how when you have two of the same report screens open, it kind of locks down the screen? And that's what I wanted to avoid. So I want to, if the 1099 type box does not equal NA, if I run this again, notice now the NA doesn't show. But it also won't tell me if I need to fix anything, right? So it's up to you what you want to display and what you don't want to display. I'm not going to save it with this. I'm just going to close it. All right, let's go back to our PowerPoint. So that is the cash journal report for 1099 summary data, and that is a great tool to use to verify that the data is accurate, and you can get ready to run the process. This screen is in the PowerPoint is exactly the screen that I just walked you all through by adding an adjustment to that ABC vendor. Um, so that's what that is. It's just so you have it in the documentation as well. It's real easy to fix the totals. Okay, so are you ready to go through the Atrix wizard? So this screen, what you have to do is select, well, let me take you back to MIP. So how do you get to that screen? In Classic, you go to Activities, you go down to Accounts Payable, and then you select Produce Vendor 1099s. And you can run this process as many times as you wish, without filing, without saving the filing, until you're ready to do it for real. I'm going to start with the form type of new. And I'll go through the history as well a little bit later in our presentation. And then I want to pick the 2024 1099 NEC. So you know how these all have 2024 already? That's another clue that this this specific MIP database has been upgraded to the latest version in 2020, sorry, 24.1. And since we're in MIP, I want to show you where you can see, hang on, it's under help, about MIP. Here is the version that this one is on. So this specific MIP database is fine as far as updating the MIP database is updated. So this is already updated, but notice this one doesn't have form updates. I tested this earlier, and my user on this specific workstation does not have the correct permissions to update the forms. And so maybe they fixed it. I'm going to test real fast with you guys to see if I can do this. I was getting an error message before, but we'll test it out real fast. If the forms have been updated, they should be grayed out. If they have not been updated, then you'll see the forms updates in with black print and the button is not grayed out. But you need to have rights on your specific workstation to run executables so that you can update it. If you wanted to, you could then filter based on like a vendor type or based on a grant or a program or a fund or whatever the case may be. But most of the time, I'm not going to click filter anything. I just want everything. Oh, you know what? It's going to work. Nope, it's not. It's still corrupt. Sorry. Not a problem. We're going to just use the PowerPoint. So back in the PowerPoint, we've clicked OK. It's done this little thinking through process. And the very next screen you're going to see is this 1099 setup wizard. Okay. So once you see that 1099 setup wizard screen, you have three choices. The first choice is I want to test drive the 1099 wizard with only the first 25 of my recipients, which might be handy if you have a lot of them, because some of you have hundreds of vendors that you need to issue 1099s for. Others don't. So that's up to you. You can also select, I want to test drive the 1099 wizard with all of my recipients. And if you do it in test drive, in test mode, it allows you to go all the way through the process without even like you can connect to the e-file server and without having to file anything. Any changes you make while you're in test mode will not be saved because you're in the Atrix wizard. Okay, so keep in mind, whatever changes you make while you are in the wizard, this Atrix 1099 wizard, they'll need to be made again when you run it again, or you need to update the vendor information with whatever changes you were making on that vendor. Test that if you do it in the test drive, you'll also have a watermark on the forms that say do not file. Okay, so it's just protecting you. I have done many of this testing with the no thanks start processing, but you have to be careful of that and don't do any filing because it would be for real. So let's go next. Next is, so that's that same one. That's what I was focusing on right now, that any changes you make will not be saved. All right. The next screen is your ID number, your EIN number. You want to make sure that EIN number is correct for the fund that you've selected or for the organization you selected. To make the permanent change, you actually exit out of here, go up to organization information, and change your federal tax identification number. For some of you, you actually have multiple funds that actually represent separate entities with separate tax ID numbers. You can process the 1099s in MIP, but there's two things that you have to do. The first thing is only do one fund at a time. And you know that screen where I said you could filter, that very, very first screen where you filter by the fund or whatever code you use, segment code, to represent that entity? Be sure to use that filter and filter by the specific entity. The other thing you need to do is before you process any of the 1099s for each entity, so let's say it's entity one, you want to go to the company sorry, I call it company, to the organization and organization information, and make sure that the EIN number is in there for the specific entity that you are about to process the 1099s for. So once you're done with that entity and you're getting ready to go on to the next entity, then you'll have to go back to organization information, and change the EIN number to the entity number two's EIN number. So it makes sense? So before you process the 1099s for each specific entity, make sure that the entity EIN number is changed under organization information. All right. A lot of detail, but it can be done. On this screen, the very next screen that you get, if you click next, they always say, please read carefully, right? You want to use a single 1099 data file for this EIN. You don't want to use multiple ones. None of our users, none of our clients have a need for this, because you either, yeah, it don't just use, no, I use a single 1099 data file. Okay. Next is screen is so you can verify the information, the address, the, city, state, zip, the street address, and the contact name for the entity that you're processing 1099s for. That contact name information has to be filled in, and you can actually fill it in from the wizard, which is especially helpful if you have a different contact name for another entity when you run the other entities. If it's the same contact name throughout, then again, be sure to change it under the organization information screen. Okay, that is the contact name. The next, state and local tax. So this screen allows you to add the state and local tax items to the 1099s. Very rarely is this really needed, but for those of you that have the payroll module as well, you may see tax information from the payroll module. It's just going to show in this wizard. It will not apply to the 1099 form. So don't worry about if you see some payroll items in your tax items box. That's okay. It's normal. It'll get ignored by the 1099 process. All right. Next, before we get into the wizard, I mean, the main parts of the data verification screens, the recipient ID number. So basically the social security numbers if it's individual people, or the EIN numbers if it's companies. You have a choice on truncation or no truncation. If it's truncated, any of these truncated choices allows you to truncate or mask the vendor's tax ID numbers on the printouts. So if you're running the printouts and you're not having Atrix do it, but you're doing it, and you want to make sure that your file copies have the social security numbers or the EIN numbers truncated, then select truncate with either asterisk or with X's. You have a choice. If you select truncate one of these choices on the recipient copies, it will not be truncated. The tax number will not be truncated. Only on your file copies will the number be truncated. Okay. So far, so good. Let me check some of these questions. Oh, very good questions. The questions pertain to adjustments, and yes, I'll go through it again. But let me finish going through this part, and then I'll come back and go through adjustments again. So that's the truncation. Come on, mouse. Here we go. Once you have all of that organization information verified and the EIN numbers and the masking numbers, it starts, the wizard goes through what it calls the prepare grid section. And I can't say that fast. This next section will give you different columns based on what screen you're on. And so it'll have you go through 3 or 4 screens where you're verifying, like for example, in this example, it's verifying the tax ID, the and the name of the vendor, the address line, city, state, SIP, right? And then the next screen will have you verify like the dollar amounts, the non-employee compensation, the federal tax withholding, it's all that other all the amount fields. The wizard itself, the screen itself at the top, it'll allow you to go either next or the previous screens. You know, you can go back to the very beginning of the screens. The company setup, number 6 at the top where I'm circling with my mouse, that will take you through the organization setup wizard that we just went through all those screens. This one, the columns are labeled very clearly. For example, you know, the column header, this is the taxpayer ID. So whatever set of fields you're on, the data that it's asking you to verify will be highlighted in blue. And so notice how this one is a little highlighted in blue. So that's will be highlighted. I mean, that's what you need to verify. If something doesn't look right, or if you have a vendor in here that's marked as a 1099 vendor, but there's no tax ID, you need to go back, exit out, and add that vendor ID to the vendor record, and then start this process again. You could technically add it manually to this screen, but if you ever had to rerun it again, you'd have to enter it again. So why not set up the vendor the right way to begin with? Okay, so that's what that is. These next screens, as we mentioned, what they label as number 3, that's all the non-financial information. And this number 4, that contains all the dollar amount information and what box numbers they're on, because that'll determine how it gets printed out on the form. And then this amount up here that they have circled with number 5, that's the grand total for that vendor that is going to get reported on a 1099 for all the forms together. Okay. All right. Oops, hang on a second. Yep. Okay. So, speaking of adjustments, are corrections needed? So you've reviewed the cash journal report, you reviewed all the screens up to so far, but as you're going through this wizard, you're like, oh, I still need to make this fix. I need to correct these changes, whether it's a dollar amount, whether it's the tax ID, whatever. At that point, you need to go back to the vendor record, and I'm going to answer the question because we had a request to go through the adjustments again. And so what if I actually had another vendor? So let me run the report again. I'm going to run the cash journal report again that I set up. And for example, this one, the Wendell Property Management, it's 360.25, 360.25. And this one was for miscellaneous 01 for 2024. Because I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh, this should not be NA. This should be miscellaneous 01 as well. So how do you make that adjustment? Number one, you go to the vendor record. I'm going to get into the vendor records, and that could be in Classic or Cloud. I'm going to go to the 1099 information section, and at the bottom, the 1099 adjustment grid, I'm going to specify the year that the adjustment applies to. In this case, it's 2024. In the type field, I'm going to select the form that it applies to. In this example, it applies to the miscellaneous form and not the NEC. And it also applies to the miscellaneous 01. And the amount was 360.25. And that's all I have to do. And so the other question that was provided was, would you use the adjustment to pull in information from your legacy system? Yes, you would. You would definitely, if you, this is your first year to be in MIP, whether cloud or classic, I don't care, but you have part of the year has 1099 payment information in your legacy system. Yes, use the adjustment grid to bring in that data. And that can be imported or manually entered. If you only have a few, manually enter it. It's very easy and very fast. Okay. All right. I wish I could show you the wizard, but I can't. How important it is to have the right security settings. And so that's what we just walked through. So again, here are the steps. Exit out of the Atrix grid, and you will be receiving a copy of this recording, and you will be receiving a copy of this PowerPoint presentation. Any correction that you need to make pertaining to vendor and vendor payments need to be made on the vendor records. Tells you where. And then once all the information has been entered, all the corrections on the adjustment grid in this example, then you just start that whole Atrix process again. Okay. So side note, when you're in that Atrix grid, there's some right-click functionality on the columns. This screen walks you through what's available on the right-click functionality on the column headers. And so you can sort the column, you can cut, copy, paste, you can actually import CSV file to this column, etc. Okay. But again, if you only do it on the wizard, it doesn't update the vendor record, so you'd have to do it again if you run it again. And you can also have the same right-click functionality under rows, and you have to click on the row number to get that functionality. It's a little thing, but it makes a difference. So once you've gone through and verified the data within the wizard, then you come to this screen, the printing and filing options. So the bottom line is you can choose to have Atrix do the filing, or you can do it yourself. I would highly recommend having Atrix do at least part of it. It'll save you a lot of headaches. Here are the up-to-date charges on it. Keep in mind that if you choose Atrix to do this, then you will need to create an account with Atrix. It'll walk you through it by clicking on it. So for example, if you select complete 1099 e-filing service, if you've never created an Atrix account, once you hit enter or tab, it'll take you to the Atrix login screen on the internet. If you, at the bottom, if you select other options, but you elect to have Atrix do the federal filing or the state filings, the printing federal 1099s and the state 1099, sorry, e-filings, there we go. There's no charge. So as you select the options, just keep track of how much you would be charged or not charged. A lot of this is free. Like the e-filing, Atrix will do it, the federal e-filing free of charge. The state one, they will charge 75 cents for recipients. Okay. So that's just keep an eye on the pricing. Some of the other options here's the breakdown of what is provided for each option. Um, the the complete filing, they'll do everything. They'll do the print and mail 1099s, which is nice because you don't have to worry about getting the right paper or envelopes or postage and making sure everything is aligned. They'll do all the electronic filing, federal and state, if state is applicable. They'll make the electronic 1099s available for all of your recipients. So that's in addition to mailing amount and the cost. Okay. The print recipients option, it allows you to manually print out and mail your recipients 1099s, which means you have to get the paper, you have to get the envelopes, you have to spend the postage. Let me go to the next screen. And then you have all the additional e-filing options, what they'll go through. And again, we want to make sure that you see that as of tax year 2024, the new IRS rule, that if you have more than 10 1099s or W-2s or a combination, you have to e-file the federal forms. Okay, so that is that. Once you have the forms, when you click on next, whatever you've made the selection, the next, if you select to print any of the forms yourself, it will take you through the form viewer wizard where it'll look like this. And at the top, it'll tell you which form are you looking at. In this example, we're looking at the payer form, right? And then you'll have recipient forms, you'll have the 1096 form, all that is in as you walk through the steps. You can verify how it looks. Some of them, like if it's the copy that you keep, then you'll have, no, I think one of them has 4 copies on it, one of them has 2 different vendors on it. It'll walk you through it. Just pay attention to what is labeled at the top. At any point in time, on any of these forms, you can print final. It's kind of misleading where it says print draft or print final, where the number 4 is at the top, because the print final can be reprinted. It's not the final printing. You can reprint the print final or print to a PDF, right? So you have those options. All right. So we've walked through verifying data, walking through the wizards. We're assuming everything is filed, but once everything is filed, what if you realize, ooh, I need to make some corrections or I need to reprint stuff? How do you do that? Come on, mouse. So if, and this assumes you finished your filing, Atrix did all the electronic filing that you wanted to do, if it's even just federal. Um, but let's say you did skip somebody and you need to reprint or you need to add somebody. What do you do? Well, remember that when you select the 1099 process from the drop-down list under activities and then accounts payable and process 1099s, this time, if you need to make corrections to forms that have already been totally filed, you need to then go to the same screen and select form type history. When you select form type history, at the bottom of the screen, it'll show up any of your filings that you've submitted. In this case, there would only be one. In my little demo database, there was only one. And as you can tell, it's a few years ago. It would have said 2024. So you want to make sure you select the one that for the right tax year. I'm assuming you want to do it for 2024 and you check mark and then you click OK. So that gets you started. The next screen, I wonder if I can make this a little bit bigger. Nope, I can't. Sorry. The next screen will bring up your 1099 history options. And the history options will show you Um, on the left-hand side, the last completed options. And this is a list of all the possible filings and their last status, right? So that's all of the possible filings. And for example, if you have printed filed a form, but it doesn't show that on this list, um, it could mean that Atrix just has not recorded that filing yet because they get a little swamped. Uh, you won't be able to edit or correct the filing. Instead, you would just use the e-file or print incomplete 1099s to complete that filing for Adrix. Okay, so anything that says incomplete, you would select option number 3 over here on the right-hand side. So what are the various options? I've listed them here on the next screen. This explains that left-hand side of that previous screen. And on the right-hand side, the 3 choices are correct completed 1099s, like if you need to change the value because you found the mistake after everything's been filed, or this bottom one is you can e-file or print complete 1099s. If you, for example, you've printed the recipient but not the federal copies, etc., things like that. You can also start over. So let's say you're like, I just totally messed up. I just need to start over. There's too many. You can do that. You can start over. I don't know what the ramifications are. Like if it's past the deadline, that would be for you to find out. I haven't kept up to date on all that, but that's what that start over option is. And the E1099 password lookup only applies if you've chosen the complete filing option. So if you chose that to have Atrix do everything, that's when you have this option. It allows you to look up all of the access passwords for your recipients because you're kind of their administrator. Okay, so that's what that is. The reprinting 1099s, that allows you to reprint some or all of your filings, and it walks you through the choices of what you want to reprint, and it all depends on what type of filing you will have. You know, that depends those are the choices. And then if you selected this option, then you're going to get the appropriate screens that allow you then to reprint whatever forms you need to reprint. On this tab, I've listed some of the other changes for the required 1099 forms. Um, some of this is repeated from what I mentioned earlier at the beginning of this presentation. For example, the federal copies, they're no longer required to be on the pre-printed forms, right? You can print them on plain paper. The recipient copy should all be printed on the blank 4-part perforated paper, and the payer copy can all be printed on plain copier paper. And if you want to order your checks from MIP, there's a phone number you can call, not checks, sorry, 1099 forms. There's a phone number, or you can log in here and get this, go this hyperlink. Okay. Let's see, there's some other questions. Let me take a, okay, so the next question was, this person is coming into it pretty new. She doesn't know how the vendor was entered, if it was entered to receive 1099s or not. MIP is not going to automatically flag that for you. So, and that's kind of why I showed that cash journal report with all of the payments. It didn't filter. So you may want to run that cash journal report and not use because when I ran it, I used the filter of the vendor is a 1099 vendor, right? So you may want to filter on just the fact that it's a vendor and not that it's a 1099 vendor. Or if you know, if you after the fact you found out that the vendor is not flagged as a 1099 vendor but should be, that cash journal report will also give you all the payments for that vendor, and then you can get the grand total and make one adjustment entry for that form. You don't have to go through each in the history and apply the 1099 information to each accounts payable payment. MIP won't let you do that. But so as you go through that, so side note, as you go through that, if you guys have questions, reach out to us to our support screen, support portal. Just email support@jmtconsulting.com and we can help you with some of this information. Okay. Let's see. We're I already said all this. This is some more of the required forms. More technical information. Yeah, now we have questions. Okay. So the biggest in all these 20 plus years with MIP, the biggest issues I've always seen with 1099s is getting the dollar amounts correct for the vendors. If you do your due diligence, run the cash journal report, excuse me, and make sure that you've captured all the vendors that should receive a 1099. MIP makes it pretty easy to add adjusting totals on that adjustment screen like I showed you on the vendor record. If you run into issues updating, reach out to us and let us know. Dennis can help with the upgrades if you're installed on your local server. If you are hosted by MIP and you're in the cloud as well, MIP or Abila should do all the upgrades. You should already be on the latest version. There shouldn't be a problem. Okay, but check your MIP version. If you have a problem with updating the forms, when we were on let me go back to that screen. In MIP, if I go back to activities, accounts payable, produce vendor 1099s, and you select new, and you select, I'm going to select NEC, and you cannot update this forms updates. Go to your internal IT department and somebody that has administrative rights on your workstation needs to be able to run the form updates so that you can run through the whole process. Okay. If you have any problems with any of this, be sure to reach out to us at support@jmtconsulting.com and we will do our best to help you out with all of the details. Are there any other questions? Hang on a second. There's some more questions. Can we use Adam's tax forms? You'll have to forgive me. I'm not familiar with Adam's tax forms. Do they have, if they have the 1099s? So is it like a office supply store? You'll have to forgive my ignorance. I'm not familiar with Adam's tax forms at all. Ah, okay. You should be able to. I would verify. For examples, I've had clients use forms that they received from Staples or Office Max or back in the day, Office Depot, whatever, whoever it was, and they were able to use it. But honestly, my inclination would be to have Atrix do it all. Then you don't have to worry about it. Yes, there is a charge, but by the time you calculate in your your own time or your staff time to process, do all the printing and the ink and the forms and the envelopes and the postage, it's almost the same cost as if you were having Atrix do it. And I don't get paid a commission by Atrix at all. It's just ease of use because I was a user as well. A lot of you know that. And so it's just easier, right? It's a headache. Okay. Any other questions? Any other questions? Thank you all very much for listening in, for attending, and Kristen will send out the recording when it becomes available on Zoom, and also a copy of this PowerPoint. And again, if you have any questions, reach out to us at support@jmtconsulting.com with your 1099 processing question, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. All right. All right. Thank you all very much for attending. Stay warm. I know there's a bad system going through, and I'm thankful my electricity stayed on because we're getting hammered with ice right now. And I hope to talk to you all soon. Thank you.